Ganondorf's story prior to the events of Twilight Princess is a sad tale of war, exile, and ultimately execution. The Gerudo King led his people into one of the bloodiest conflicts the Kingdom of Hyrule ever saw, which resulted in utter defeat for the people of the desert. The Gerudo were massacred, and Ganondorf himself was imprisoned in the Arbiter's grounds, awaiting his demise at the hands of the ancient sages. But this wasn't to be the end of the Dark Lord. In a cruel twist of fate, the Triforce of Power's energy swelled from within Ganondorf, catching him on the brink of death and filling his body with an inhuman strength. The Gerudo King broke free of the thick steel shackles that chained him and slaughtered the Sage of Water. His eyes burned a blazing orange, tusks bursting from his gums as feral power erupted from within him. Frantically, the sages formed a plan. Despite being ran through with the Sword of the Sages, Ganondorf's power was greater than ever. In a drastic move, the sages opened the Mirror of Twilight and banished him to the Sacred Realm, sealing the tunnel between dimensions behind him. Years later, Link ventures to the Arbiter's grounds during the events of Twilight Princess. By this time, the ancient execution site is little more than a hollow ghost of its former self, ruins slowly decaying in the glacial process of being consumed by the desert that surrounds it. In the place of prisoners and executioners, Gibdos and ghosts inhabit these ruins, though none of the supernatural terrors in the dungeon are as sinister as Death's Sword. Its room is where the Spinner is found, a large open space with a single great sword in the centre, planted deep into the floor, tied down tightly with ropes. These ropes are all adorned with ofuda, Japanese religious talismans used for protection from curses and danger. Whatever this sword is, it's dangerous enough to not only be locked away in a sealed room in one of the most remote locations in Hyrule, but also be bound down with protective talismans lest it break free. Link, the hero of Twilight, cuts the blade free from its confines and takes on the spirit that possesses it. Death's Sword is a gigantic phantom, reminiscent of the Grim Reaper, who at first isn't visible to the naked eye, only with the honed senses of Link's wolf form. Death's Sword attacks by lunging the great blade at Link, powerful strikes which leave the spirit temporarily exposed when he can be struck by Link. After being attacked, Death's Sword becomes visible to Link's human form, and then can be shot down with the hero's bow, causing him to engage in close combat. And after a few hits, the Phantom's finally defeated. It drops the greatsword to the ground, which explodes, instantly causing the spirit to vanish into a swarm of insects. So, what actually was Death's Sword? What sword contains a spirit so deadly that it has to be locked away in this fashion, in the middle of an ancient execution ground? I theorise that this great runic blade, black steel wrought with burning red glyphs, was actually the sword wielded by Ganondorf before Twilight Princess. This sword may have been used by the Gerudo King during the war that resulted in his execution, before it was sealed away prior to his banishment in the Twilight Realm. Let's look at why I think this. First up, the obvious. This greatsword is obviously of extreme importance. Whoever locked this sword away was clearly terrified of its dark power. It's sealed behind a locked door in the Arbiter's grounds, and tightly bound to the floor with ropes adorned with protective warding talismans. Death's Sword is a powerful spirit, yet the seals keep it tightly bound, and it only breaks free once Link breaks a binding rope, meaning that whoever sealed it had a fair amount of power and knowledge. Ganondorf was of course imprisoned and executed at the Arbiter's grounds, so it's possible that, upon his capture, his sword was taken and sealed here due to its immense evil power by the 6 sages. The sword itself has a few important design links to Ganondorf. First and most obviously, it's a monstrous greatsword, taller than Link, with a wide brutish blade and heavy hilt. While it's obviously not the same sword, it's reminiscent of the heavy sword Ganondorf uses in the Space World 2000 Zelda tech demo, as well as Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, though of course this sword is non-canon. The sword is wrought from a strange black metal, and the hilt has details embossed in gold. One of these details, interestingly, appears to be the symbol of the Triforce, though it's upside down in relation to the Triforce found on the Master Sword, similar to the inverted Triforce found on Demise's greatsword. Ganondorf's armour in Twilight Princess also appears to be forged from this black metal, with details embossed in gold. Putting the two together is like fitting a jigsaw piece to complete a puzzle. Both the brutal size and shape of the sword as well as its design have clear comparisons to Ganondorf's armour. It's possible that, when the Dark Lord waged war prior to Twilight Princess, he not only wore this thick black armour, but wielded this powerful sword. The sword's blade itself is engraved with strange symbols which burn a bright red when the seal is broken. The colour red in Zelda is of course often associated with evil, Ganondorf and Demise specifically, such as Demise's sword having a red aura around it. These runes aren't found anywhere else in the Zelda series, or at least I couldn't find them, except that similar runes appear in the Arbiter's grounds, even on the floor in the room in which Death Sword is sealed. The Arbiter's grounds was likely of Gerudo origin, due to its location in the Gerudo Desert, as well as the presence of a statue of the goddess of the sand found within it, the same goddess of which a statue is found in the Spirit Temple in Ocarina of Time. Gerudo language is found all throughout the ruins, making it likely that it was originally created by them. If these runic symbols are some sort of ancient Gerudo script, it would further link the sword to Ganondorf, who of course is king of the Gerudo, as well as has the classic Gerudo patterns on his armour. Okay, so the sword looks like it could have belonged to Ganondorf. It's big, it's brutal, it shares a similar design to his Twilight Princess armour. But let's look at the more interesting quality of the sword, the fact that it houses one of the most nightmarish demons in the series. The spirit of the sword doesn't really have its own name, it's just called Death Sword, which for all we know could either refer to the spirit or the blade, and in Japanese it's called the Sword of Gobera, further pointing to the fact that this is just the name of the sword. Either way, it's freaking terrifying, far taller than Link, covered in a black robe with a skeletal body. It has twisted horns and its eyes burn a malicious magenta. It's nightmare fuel, but what actually is it? What could possess a sword that may have belonged to Ganondorf? Well, I think this spirit could actually be Twilight Princess's version of Phantom Ganon. We've seen Phantom Ganon a lot throughout the Zelda series in games where Ganondorf is present, with Twilight Princess being a notable exception. Ocarina of Time, The Wind Waker, Four Swords Adventures all have Ganondorf. Four Swords Adventures admittedly only in its backstory, and Twilight Princess is the only other game in the series to feature the Demon King in his Gerudo form, but doesn't feature a Phantom Ganon. Could Death Sword be Twilight Princess's version of Phantom Ganon? Phantom Ganon's appearance changes drastically throughout the games, with him being almost identical to regular Ganondorf in Ocarina of Time except for his head being skeletal with large twisted horns, while in The Wind Waker he's a spirit that appears to be wearing a suit of armour, though looks to be made of clouds or some form of magic. The only visual traits both Phantom Ganons share are that they levitate and they had horns, as well as being, well, phantoms. Interestingly, Death Sword shares all of these traits, a skeletal phantom with great horns that flies around the arena in which you fight him. Interestingly, Death Sword's Japanese name, the Sword of Gobera, is very similar to the inscription on Wind Waker Phantom Ganon's sword, which reads Zubora Gabora. Obviously, Zubora and Gabora are the blacksmiths from Majora's Mask, which raises the question, could they have made Wind Waker Ganon's sword? And if so, did they also make Death Sword? Twilight Princess's Death Sword even levitates around the room, throwing forth spheres of dark magic at Link. This is a trademark of Phantom Ganon battles. In every single appearance, Phantom Ganon uses this method of attack, though in those games the orbs can be reflected back at the spirit, while in Twilight Princess you must shoot the Phantom with the hero's bow. I think it's clear that we in fact did get a Phantom Ganon boss fight in Twilight Princess, hidden in the dark ruins of the Arbiter's grounds, in the form of the spirit of Ganondorf's lost sword. Death Sword was once Phantom Ganon, a spirit of the Demon King summoned to do his bidding, before being sealed in its master's sword and trapped for years. Over time the Phantom decayed, leaving a monstrous skeletal wraith. It's likely that, prior to Twilight Princess, Ganondorf waged war on Hyrule, clad in thick black armour adorned with gold, wielding a monstrous blade possessed with his dark magic. Upon his defeat, he was taken to the Arbiter's grounds, a Gerudo site repurposed into an execution ground where he was to be killed by the sages. His greatsword was taken from him, and due to its monstrous power was sealed by the 6 sages within the Arbiter's grounds, locked away and bound with the powerful talismans. Years later, Link discovers Ganondorf's sword in the grounds and fights the spirit possessed within it, a horrifying Phantom Ganon. The sages could not kill the Phantom and so trapped it, but with the purifying might of the Master Sword, the hero of Twilight was able to purge the darkness and destroy the blade. Thanks for watching this Zelda theory. What do you think? Could Death Sword be the lost blade of Ganondorf, containing Twilight Princess's version of Phantom Ganon? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, drop a like or subscribe for more Zelda content. Cheers guys, and I'll see you next time.